Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Exo Reality. I'm your host, Christopher Carson, attorney in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Today we're going to talk about something weird and true, as always, on Exo Reality. This time it's once again about AI. We are often told that technological change follows a predictable path. If you've ever sat through a business seminar or a Sociology 101 course, you've likely seen the diffusion of innovation graph. It's a beautiful, smooth bell curve popularized by Professor Everett Rogers. May he rest in peace. It suggests an orderly progression. The innovators lead the way, followed by the early adopters and the early majority, and then eventually the laggards. They shuffle in once resistance becomes futile. It's a model of social harmony and incremental adjustment. But when we look at the actual integration of generative artificial intelligence in our lives today, that smooth curve is nowhere to be found. Instead, what we see is a serrated edge. The advancement of AI is not a gentle tide. It is a series of sharp discontinuities. It is advancing at a breakneck speed in some sectors while hitting a brick wall in others. It is creating massive gaps between different populations, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of reality. Today, I want to explore why our institutions are failing to assimilate this technology, the psychological biases that keep us in the dark, and what a 13th century saint might teach us about navigating this cognitive revolution. The San Francisco consensus. To understand the serrated edge, that's the jagged edge, we have to look at where the blade is sharpest. There is a concept often discussed in tech circles called the San Francisco consensus. This isn't a formal treaty, but a shared realization among those operating at the frontier of AI development, the founders, the engineers, the venture capitalists. Within this network, there is a staggering agreement on the capability curves of these models, which are sharpening at a pace that renders public comprehension and even institutional adaptation nearly impossible. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt has been vocal about it. If you are on the inside of that epistemic microclimate in the Bay Area, you are seeing private benchmarks and agentic net workflows that the general public won't see for months or years. To those in the room, the world is shifting under their feet daily. But step outside that rarefied air and the signal fades. The general public encounters AI through constrained, consumer-friendly interfaces. To the average user, ChatGPT is a helpful clerk. It drafts an email, it summarizes a long article, it explains a complex concept. Because these interactions fit neatly into our existing mental models, we don't feel the ground moving. We assume that technology is just a better Google, a new search, if you will. This creates a massive divergence in perception. One group sees a godlike general purpose transformer. That's the SF, the Bay Area people. The other sees a slightly more literate autocomplete. The normalcy bias and the psychology of denial. Why is there such a gap? Much of it comes down to normalcy bias. As humans, we are evolutionary hardwired to project the recent past into the future. We assume continuity. It saves us cognitive energy. If today looks like yesterday, we assume tomorrow will too. When you use AI to revise a paragraph, it feels like a supplement. It doesn't demand that you reevaluate your identity or your professional worth. You classify it as a writing aid and move on. But this classification is a trap. Once you've labeled it a tool, you interpret all future improvements as mere refinements. You see a 20% increase in capability as a better tool rather than an inflection point towards a different kind of existence. The National Bureau of Economic Research recently released a paper titled How People Use ChatGPT. The data is telling. Most usage is concentrated in writing, editing, and basic summarization. The heavy lifting, the complex task orchestration and analytical synthesis, represents a tiny fraction of activity. We are using a digital polymath to do the work of a junior copywriter because our brains refuse to admit the scale of what is actually happening. This is what I call ontological jealousy and professional identity. Now let's get into the more politically incorrect reality of why AI adoption is so jagged. It's not just about a lack of imagination, it's about status. I call this ontological jealousy. For decades, we have tied our human dignity and social status to specific cognitive tasks. We value the expert, the attorney, the academic, the programmer, because they possess skills that are difficult to acquire. When a machine performs these tasks, sometimes better and always faster, it triggers a defensive response. We see this in the algorithm aversion documented in recent studies. We are far more critical of a machine's mistakes than a human's, especially in high-status domains. In the legal world or in academia, you see experts fixating on AI's hallucinations or its lack of true understanding. While those criticisms are often technically valid, they also serve a psychological purpose. They protect the human ego. We would rather use AI privately and hide its contribution than admit that a few billion parameters have replicated our 30 years of hard-earned expertise, like mine. This creates a shadow adoption, where the tech is used, but its authority is never publicly acknowledged. Historical mirrors, the printing press and the microscope are analogies. We've been here before. History shows us that transformative technologies rarely announce their full significance at the start. Take the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg, a Roman Catholic, I might add, didn't immediately abolish the authority of the church or the clerical class. For a long time, the manuscript system and the print system lived side by side. The revolution happened in the background as habits and workflows slowly shifted. Or consider the telescope and the microscope. Early versions of these tools produced blurry, ambiguous images. Established authorities treated them as curiosities. They didn't think like a piece of glass could overturn cosmology or biology, but these instruments weren't just tools. They were cognitive leverage. They didn't supply the interpretation, they supplied the evidence that made old theories untenable. Authority eventually migrated to those who could use the instruments fluently. AI is the telescope of the mind. It extends our ability to synthesize and reason across domains. Just as the microscope redefined what we meant by life, exposing the cell, AI is redefining what we mean by intelligence and labor. Thomistic prudence in the moral tempo is what I'm interested in now. So where does this leave us? As a practicing attorney and someone of a Thomistic orientation, that is a follower of Thomas Aquinas, the medieval theologian, I look at this serrated curve and I don't see a failure, I see a moral signal. In the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, prudence, or auriga virtuum, the charioteer of the virtues, is right reason applied to action. Prudence is not about being slow or timid, it's about being attentive to reality, circumstance, and consequence. The jaggedness of AI adoption reflects a society struggling to find a moral tempo that matches our technical power. We are right to be cautious, but we must be cautious for the right reasons. We shouldn't resist AI out of ontological jealousy or a desire to protect our status. Instead, we should be asking how to integrate it in a way that preserves human agency and the dignity of work. AI reduces the marginal cost of cognitive labor. That is a fact. We can't wish it away, but we can shape how labor is redistributed. We can ensure that as we compress reasoning and accelerate decision-making, we don't also compress our capacity for moral judgment. The decisive effects of the printing press emerged only after our expectations had shifted. We are in that in-between moment with AI. The curve is serrated because we are still learning how to name this thing. We are absorbing a cognitive multiplier before we have a philosophy capable of governing it. Our task isn't to halt the curve. It's to ensure that when the serrated edge finally levels off, the structure it has built is one that remains open to human judgment, human responsibility, and ultimately the truth. Thank you for listening to another episode. My name is Christopher Carson. Please hit the like and subscribe button.